Welcome back to the Walter Bosley channel. And this evening, we have returning one of our favorite guests, Hans Dietrich. And we're going to have some cool stuff to talk about. Before I get there, remember, go to walterbosley.com/shop and check out the Lost Horizons Symposium and Harmonicon. This is an event unlike the others we've put on, and we would like you very much to consider joining us on the Harmonicon ceremonial ritual steps over the summer, leading up to the main gathering in November in Big Bear. So go to walterbosley.com/shop and check out the Lost Horizons Symposium and Harmonicon, because you're not going to want to miss this if you're into these things, like we're going to be talking about tonight with our guest, Hans Dietrich. So without further ado, let me bring him into the room. And there we are. Oh, your mic is off.
Hey, Walter, how's it going?
There we go. Good, good, good. Hey, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. It's been a minute, but wow, life's been definitely in a whirlwind for the last month or two. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, it keeps time going faster, right?
we're always in the quickening. It seems like every year just gets faster and faster.
Yeah, well, after you hit 45, right? It's like it just all blurs. It used to be that you could tell a difference between the decades. Then you reach a certain age where 2004 is virtually the same as 2017, and
Literally, yeah.
yeah.
That's how my memory goes sometimes. It's like, wasn't that like last year? No, bro, that was in 2010. Oh.
Yeah, so it's wild. So you know speaking of time, we were talking about the Mahabharata takes place, as you
Yes.
said, in a period of 18 days, right?
18 days. It was called the 18-Day War. Mahabharata means the War of the Land.
Yeah.
There's a couple of pre-tales that kind of describe how it came about. One of them is in the Purana Vedas. We escaped a solar outburst and we went to the fourth density from the sun called Mahar and spent maybe a couple thousand years to a millennia there, which is, 10,000 years, where we grew in height. Our skin color changed to blue and pale. We all gained auburn and dark reddish hair and green eyes and blue eyes. And then we decided to come back to Earth to repopulate it. We, whoever our ancients were.
Yeah.
And when we got back to Earth, we realized that Earth was still populous of humans. The solar outburst had not killed them all off. And some of the children that we had left behind, these demigods, were protecting the human race that was still left on this planet. And so this great war breaks out for the war of the land, between the gods and these demigods and, human beings. And it's fascinating because I'd be very interested to get your take on it once you finish reading what you're reading about it, because there are some very interesting characters that are portrayed in the Mahabharata, and one of them is character I was talking to you in the green room about. His name is Babarak, or barbaric, right? I mean, this is maybe where we get this word from. And he famously has a fight with Krishna, and Krishna lobs his head off toward the end of the fight and turns his back, and he's walking away in triumph, and the head starts laughing at him from laying on the ground. Ha ha ha, mighty Krishna, you think you've slain me, but I cannot be slain because the rough translation is I'm an automaton. I'm an artificial being. And taking my head off doesn't kill the source of who I am. And so they continue to fight. I don't really remember how the fight ends up. Obviously Krishna wins, but Krishna is like the savior of the Mahabharata, and he's one of these demigods. So here we are coming back from Mahar, this fourth density, which could be Mars, it could be dimensional, not sure. But if we're talking a fourth density from the sun, that would be Mars, technically.
Mhm.
unless this mysterious planet of Vulcan actually exists between Mercury and the Sun. But
Isn't it interesting that when you get into the relics, anomalous objects and relics found on the moon, there is a story of a robot head that is
oh, the head of
allegedly,
C-3PO, yeah.
yeah. And so here's this story of the head of the automaton lopped off. Could the events, that particular event of the Mahabharata, have occurred on the moon? You know, when you have legends that associate these beings and this civilization and such things going on the moon, why not? You know.
Give a little homage to these two gentlemen, um,
Yeah.
Hoagland and Mike Barra. I know Mike. I've never met Hoagland though.
Mm-hmm.
But on the back cover is what you're talking about. It's this
There it is.
head that was supposedly found in one of the
Yeah.
NASA Apollo photos.
Could that be barbaric?
Who knows? You know, did the flesh melt off? Right? I mean, think of the Terminator. It is technically a cyborg. You have living human tissue on top of a mechanical exoskeleton. And even Terminator is a little different because the brain in that movie is the heart. But
Yeah.
if you had multiple areas of electronics or computerized systems, taking the head off shouldn't sever the rest of the body. The body technically could still perform depending on how it was designed. The other interesting thing about the Mahabharata are these weapons that are called the Brahmastra weapons. So these are the weapons of Brahma. So
Yes.
Brahma is the great creator and the great destroyer. And so in the Vedic, literatures, they talk about the breath of Brahma. And so this is several 100,000 years to millions of years where the universe breathes in,
Mm-hmm.
the Big Bang, and then it breathes out, the decline. And so as we look through Hubble, and now Kepler, it's like we're seeing beyond. I mean, especially with the Kepler telescope, my goodness, or sorry, the James Webb telescope. That's
Webb, yeah.
yeah, we're seeing beyond anything that Hubble could see. And so it's like, well, how far does our universe go? And therefore, again, how old is it?
Well,
And
I'll share something with you that
yeah,
I
please.
mentioned here before that, I think enough time has passed. And besides, I was never briefed on this officially, but I did hear it while on active duty in the Air Force.
Little disclosure here. All right.
Here's what I heard. Here's what I heard. Again, should any of my former masters be watching, I was not briefed on this officially. It was in a personal, private conversation. But I was told by someone that there is this, or was this pretty large, massive um, telescope uh, that was Earth based in New Mexico, somewhere in the vicinity, let's say, of the Sandia Labs.
Is this the Lucifer array
No,
that the Vatican paid for? Anyway,
that's the Vatican thing, but
yeah.
this was an Air Force thing, I think, or NASA, but a lot of Americans don't know that NASA is technically a Defense Department organization. They don't realize that. But this used conjugate phase mirrors. And there were and there were just thousands of these little mirrors, and they're constantly correcting. And here's what I was told, that initially the images we were told were taken from Hubble. Several of them were actually taken from the ground using this special telescope where the mirrors were constantly with computers adjusted for the this, that, and the other. And, I can't, that's all I can tell you is it's a story that I was told.
So that's interesting.
Because it would have to go through the atmosphere and all of that.
Not only that, yeah, but then you look at Hubble and a lot of it is not natural view anyway. They're using, EM field and infrared field to create those beautiful nebulas.
Yeah.
I mean, with our naked eye, we cannot see them. And so this is interesting. It's interesting that you talk about these, redirecting mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a spot outside of Las Vegas as you're flying north toward Reno I'd never seen this because this was the first time I'd ever gone to Vegas, was what, 3 years ago now. I'd never seen this before.
Right.
And we were flying out of Vegas, and it's like these huge circular arrays of solar panels
Yes.
with a giant refractor light. I mean, it looks like a
A sun.
satellite array.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what you're describing really reminds me of that. And so what a better way to disguise something like that as, oh, this is a solar farm.
Yeah, just a solar farm. Nothing to see here.
So,
Nothing to see here.
that's interesting.
So
They just closed that facilities down in the last few months.
really,
Yeah, it was
you're talking about the one with the tower with the
it's got a
ultra
tower
bright.
and it looks like a giant light.
Yeah.
That's the sun refracting through whatever they have up there. It's like a
And it's
crystal.
closed. Why did they close it?
I have no idea. They it was in the news a couple months ago that they were closing the facilities, and I'm just like, so you telling this story makes me kind of curious.
Yeah, all sorts of weird technology, which to
Well, we're
bring
no
it
longer
back.
spending money on that now that we have these amazing satellites and
Yeah,
telescopes in
exactly.
space. So let's just shut it down. Well,
But when you talk about this amazing technology,
that's
how
interesting.
much of it is inspired by, stories of ancient times. What is the who was it? Did Archimedes do the thing with the mirror using the sunlight as a light?
To burn ships
Yeah,
coming into the harbor, he would
yeah.
like a child with a magnifying glass burning
Hmm.
cans. Yeah,
Those.
I believe so. And they had several of these set up on the hillside above the harbor. And so as they were coming in the morning sun, it was perfect. We're just gonna burn your sails and you're not going anywhere.
It brings to mind the war between, what was it, the Rama Empire and their enemy that could have been Atlantis. There's some suggestion that when we talk about the war between Atlantis and an enemy that they had, um, it could have been, some people say, between Atlantis and Lemuria. Well, when you look at Lemuria actually could be inspired by stories of the lost Vedic Empire.
Sure.
That and a lot of times people say, or when you talk about this lost Vedic Empire, they think of, oh, ancient India. But even the sources who talk about this say, no, no, no.
No,
India as we know it is a descendant culture
descendant.
of this lost Vedic Empire.
Just
So
like Egypt is a descendant culture of a much older
yes.
culture, and Egypt,
Yeah.
as I would say, that's a Greek name. Egyptos, Hepkaptos, Het So it's like in its own translation, it's not really the name of the land, it's the name of a temple that was in, or a stele that was in Memphis, or Men Nefer, because Memphis is again a Greek name.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have this background of Egypt being like India, being this descendant culture of something that was there a lot longer before and much.
Right. Which I find, I have, over the years, I have found, in the West, particularly in America, because of the religious foundation and base, primarily we're talking about the Yahwist monotheisms, which are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, right? And those dominate in this part of the world. So there's this fascination with the Middle East and those cultures, and that's what matters. And
Sure.
so ignore all the others. There's nothing interesting in any of the others. And personally, I have found, and I still do, I'm finding, Hinduism and the history of the Vedic um, thing, uh,
Traditions,
the
yeah.
traditions, I find those, for me, infinitely more interesting than the ones that I was raised to be so locked into. And I just do. I find it a lot more interesting than
There are a lot of similarities, though. I
Oh,
think,
sure, yeah.
Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, they have their demons, they have their angels.
But they drew from traditions before them, and
Sure.
the
Oh,
Vedic
for
is
sure.
way older,
Way older.
you
Yeah.
know, than any of those three. So I'm thinking, it seems to me, if you to get closer to the truth, you need to go farther back. So why should I commit and be devoted to these Johnny come latelys? Because the priesthood, which is the biggest trust me bro scam in history, tells me that I should because they're the experts. To me, it's like those three are like you got three used car dealerships pointing at the other two saying their cars suck. You need to buy from us. Trust me, bro.
So it's like a circular argument amongst all
Yeah.
three of them.
And it's like I believe in a different way.
And they're all owned by
So,
the same person.
and of course, they react with, oh my gosh, the devil's getting you, shun him, because he's turned away from the way. And to me, it's hilarious.
But we do I do think there is a little bit of that also in like Vedic and Hindi,
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
religions. Not as profound as we find in the Abrahamic religions, but definitely there's something there because in a sense they're very much related and they come from something very much older. So again, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you are talking about a civilization that, came up with the caste system, and that's not so great.
But we find this everywhere, right? We just
Yes, we do.
we
That's
don't
the
call
irony,
it a
right?
caste system.
That's the irony. And I think most free thinkers um, opposed to it, stand opposed to it, whatever brand it is, wherever
Sure.
it's found.
As
You
the,
know,
as they should be, as we
yeah.
should be. Yeah. No, I fully agree. Having been raised in a caste system, it's very interesting to witness firsthand.
Mm.
So, as your audience might know, I grew up in Kathmandu, Nepal from the age of 4 until I was 19, and then I went back. I've been back several times. But living there, you're exposed to the caste system, like
Yeah.
day in and day out.
Wow.
And you have Brahmins, you have Kshetris, and then you have everything down to untouchable caste.
Okay.
And the Brahmins are very proud of who they are. I mean, they're very proud people. The Kshetris are kind of on the mix because they're kind of lower caste Nepali Brahmins, and then it goes down to the untouchables. But you go downtown Kathmandu, you go to King's Road, you're out in front of the Annapurna Hotel, and unfortunately, beggar families will mutilate their children so that they can, create this.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. But there was this kid, Ram, and he was always hanging outside of Hotel Annapurna. And a lot of us would go there because one of the people I went to school with, they own the hotel, so we'd be able to go there and just, we threw a lot of school parties there, and it was interesting. But this kid would always be hanging out outside the front gate. And I know his life is hell.
Yeah.
But he had more happiness than I have ever seen in my life.
That's amazing.
People would pay him attention. They'd give him attention. They'd talk to him. They'd educate him. He was blown away by this because as an untouchable, he's not supposed to have access to this. He's supposed to, not be that. And so many years later in Nepal, we have companies coming in from Dubai and United Arab Emirates and Qatar, um, Bahrain, these nations, and they're building these gated communities and high rises. And so they come to Nepal, and of course they go to the upper caste families, and they're like, "Hey, we have these, 5-year jobs for anybody in your family who wants to make good money."
Mm-hmm.
And the stubbornness of the upper caste. Why do we need that? We have hotels, we have taxi services, we own
Yeah.
all the alcohol and Coca-Cola and this, that, and the other thing. The casinos, airplanes, banks. So they're not interested. But that untouchable rock crusher on the side of the road gets wind of this through his friends, and he's like, "Sign me up. I have nothing to lose. I'm sitting here,
Sure.
huffing diesel fumes all day, crushing rocks."
Yeah.
So he goes to Dubai or somewhere, Qatar, Dubai, Bahrain, one of these places, and he learns a trade. Yeah, he's an indentured servant for 5 years. This sadly even happens in this country when
Oh yeah.
families are sponsored. That's how long it takes to get your green card. Go figure. Anyways, so he goes to Dubai and he learns this trade, and he was there for 5 years, and he's saving up all the money that he has. And because he's never been exposed to this, he's absorbing all this knowledge of how to build these communities because he's there on the ground. And he
Yeah.
decides to stay another 5 years. So he's there for 10 years. Comes back mid 30s. In Nepalese terms, he's a millionaire
Wow.
and now can buy property, build his own gated community, rent it out to expats like myself or other people in the community, and make money off of that. And the Brahmins and the Chetris are like, wait, what happened? How is this untouchable worth more than I am?
That's right. So how does that, and does that change how he's treated?
I think a lot. I think a lot. Yeah, money. Well,
Money.
interestingly, so I'll share a personal story. So when my dad lived there in Kathmandu during the Peace Corps,
Mm-hmm.
and later on during his doctoral dissertation, he brought on a servant, this kid who's an untouchable,
Mm-hmm.
would beg my dad every time he walked by, please stop, please, give me money, education, job, something. And so my dad was
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm gonna give you a job, teach you how to cook, and pay for your schooling. And so because in US dollars to Nepali terms, 70s, late 60s, the dollar was, it went a long way.
Yeah.
So my dad's like, sure, I can totally do this. And, now I have somebody working for me. And so he put Ram Gopal, which is his name. He goes by Casey now, but Ram Gopal through school, taught him how to cook. And Ram Gopal saw the opportunities and he went to India. He went to basically Calcutta or Goa, and he
Mm-hmm.
got on the trade ships from Goa or Calcutta all the way to Hamburg. And so he would buy trinkets
Mm-hmm.
from India and sell them in Hamburg for, 6 to 12 times their value.
Okay.
So he did this for years. And then he came back to Nepal. He changed his name to Casey, which is a short name for Khatri Chetri, half Chetri. But he was considered an untouchable kid, basically. And he started buying property, and he owns Casey's Consequence and Casey's Restaurant downtown Kathmandu. And, they've raided him several times because they're like, how is this untouchable, making so much money without
Yeah.
selling
The
drugs?
harassment.
Oh, of course, it's horrible. But he managed to survive through that. And because of what he made through his travels, he put himself through chef school. And he has taught most, at least when I lived there, most of the chefs in the five-star hotel restaurants. And he devised the system of putting both your gas system on your the top of your building and
Mm-hmm.
and your water systems on the top of the building. So you have a high pressure system that comes to the kitchen.
Oh wow. Okay.
Because otherwise, you're at 4,700 feet. It's hard to cook stuff there, and you don't have
Yeah.
firewood.
Oh yeah.
So you need pressure cooking, and the only way you can get high density pressure cooking is creating that pressure line.
Oh yeah.
And so he introduced this to all the hotels and all the restaurants, and he made a fortune. But yeah, so it shows that you can rise up out of that.
Sure.
But a lot of them do not have this opportunity. So
Right. 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 Yeah. It's interesting. Very very interesting how changing one's material circumstances can throw certain things into a dither like that. As from my perspective, of course, being an American, it should throw it into that. Yeah, I like to
well,
hear
and this
stories like that.
this kind of segues into a topic that we were talking about
Mhm.
highway
Yeah.
robbermen,
Uh-huh.
basically. So you have the haves, the Wells Fargo money train coming through or coach coming through, and you have the have-nots, at least here in the States,
Mhm.
These red coat cowboys going out there shooting up and robbing the train. And so,
Yep.
but this has gone on all over the world. And I
Mhm.
think this is, I mean, to me, super fascinating. I never really looked into a lot of it until recently because, I would consider old cowboys, you talk about Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid and that whole scenario. Yeah, I agree with you. They were definitely agents,
Yeah,
but they could also be considered thugs for what they were doing. And so
technically, yeah.
they were robbing. They were the Robin Hoods, robbing the rich to feed their pockets or feed the poor.
But oddly, neither one of them um, are known to have killed
Killed
anybody
anybody. You're right.
in any of that. And one of them had a very good reputation for being quite the gunslinger, the excellent shot. And yet, by golly, when these law enforcement posses were chasing after him, he just couldn't hit his mark. He could have got a job as an Imperial stormtrooper, in Star Wars. Oddly enough. So yeah, that's one of the clues that I present. But I watched the film that you recommended, The Deceivers,
Oh, good. I'm
and
glad
I
you watched it.
really, really liked it. And I did
Yeah,
not,
it's low budget, but it's very well put together. Yeah.
I didn't expect the dark thread. Brosnan, his character, kind of goes there.
Yes. On several levels. So speaking of, so today, in many memes online and hip hop industry and there's this revelation of the thug.
Mhm.
And so a lot of these highwaymen in today's standards could have been considered thugs. And this word thug comes from an older word. It comes from a word out of India called Thuggee.
Mhm.
And so the Thuggee cults are mostly known between the 13th to 18th century. But there are depictions of what would be considered thug robberies or Thuggee robberies all the
Mhm.
way back to like the seventh century. So,
Mhm.
sorry, what am I saying? 700 AD, basically. So from 700 AD to like 1300s, there wasn't much recording, but after the 1300s, there was. And then when the British got involved in India, especially with the East India Company, um, they started looking into this. And so the Thuggees were very much, I would say, in an interesting light, a esoteric or mystery school approach to a culture. And
Mhm.
so they had rules and regulations. They believed that they came from an ancient demonic spirit. And throughout the course of time, Kali, the destroyer, she's one of the three phases of Brahma. So you have Brahma, the creator, you have Shiva, the neutral or the destroyer of the ego, and then you have Kali is the destroyer of flesh.
Mhm.
So they all kind of circulate throughout the Trinity, which is why you always see Shiva holding the trident. And
Yeah.
Brahmas always have, the three
Yeah.
stripes because they're representing those three phases, creation, neutral, destruction. And so the Thuggees ended up worshiping Kali because she ended up destroying and devouring the demon that they came from. So she vanquished them. And so as a result of this, the original Thuggees devoted themselves, and it would be very interesting to discover. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information on this, but to discover how on earth they started these Thuggee cults.
Mhm.
And so what they would do is they would devote themselves to Kali. And so they started figuring out how do we do this and still create profit for ourselves. That sounds like modern religions. Create profits for ourselves and still have an existence, but then
Yeah.
also be coveted. And so they came up with a series of methods in especially during the British times and earlier times. Bloodletting or killing somebody where there's blood was a
Mhm.
serious crime.
Mhm.
So they would take this sacred cloth that people would wear around their waist and they would wrap the end of it with coins, tie it up, and it was called a rumal. and they would wrap it around people's, throats and strangle them.
Yeah.
That way there's no bloodletting, right? And so
Hmm.
then they could bury the bodies. Oftentimes these guys would they'd be a band of them. Usually they'd guise themselves as musicians or minsters or jesters. And so there's that kind of festy element about it. Interesting.
Sure. Looking all harmless.
Right. And they would tag along with groups of wealthy travelers.
Right.
And eventually they'd spend a month or two with them, traveling through India, especially northern India, probably old Silk Road ties or offshoots of the Silk Road. And eventually they'd be drugging them over the course of time. And then somebody in the group would be like, oh, my ankle, I have a false soccer injury. Can
Yeah.
we stop here for the night? Because they already had half of their crew ahead spotting the spot where they would bury the bodies.
Yeah.
And so they would then attack these travelers, which were mostly men. They would never attack women or children, which I thought was interesting,
Hmm.
and steal all their hoard and sacrifice them to Kali. And so they would use specific drugs, in a sense, they were all plant-based, to both induce themselves to go into a state of consciousness. You saw this in the Deceivers, but they also, often drug their victims.
Hmm.
And it's wow, this is like super fascinating because they also have their omens. And so if a crow caws, they know not to do something on a specific date, or if they see a specific flower in bloom, there's an omen around that. And I find that interesting because of how many crows are in India. It's like, well, they probably never got anything done, but they're known during the British times to have at least taken out 40,000 plus people. And so this is not small potatoes. And this guy Pattinson or Patterson, the name is, I think it's Pattinson, William Pattinson, was a British officer, and he was
Yes.
unlike most others. And he started basically doing detective work, which no officers really did. He was doing forensic detective work.
He's talked about in this excellent book about the Northwest frontier titled Soldiers Sahib.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Very good book, which I got when I was in Islamabad. I bought it in the hotel bookstore. But yeah, Pattinson, interesting.
Yeah, and so he ended up piecing together where all these Thuggee sites were hit.
Right.
He pinpointed an area that they worked within. He pinpointed a center that they worked within, infiltrated that, and ended up imprisoning many of these Thuggees, who then, for their life, would squeal on the rest of the clan, and eventually the East India Company and the British regiments took them out. But like I said, I wasn't really interested in this topic, except it just keeps coming up. Thug life, thug this, thug that. And I started thinking, I was always fascinated by, not fascinated in this sense, but fascinated by the story of this character, Charles Sobraj.
Hmm.
So Charles Sobraj was a French Thai mix. He was a French citizen, but he was Thai French mix or Malaysian French mix. And in the 60s and 70s, he was hanging out in Thailand, and he's known as the Bikini Killer, or sorry, we're going on morbid topics here, but
Oh
he's,
no.
he's known as the Bikini Killer, or also the Serpent. And so initially he was kind of skirting around South Asia on the hippie trail, that everybody was following through India and Nepal into Thailand and Cambodia and Laos, and even through Afghanistan and some of the old, Silk Road trails. And so, hippies would come from Europe and they'd travel all across, Asia in that sense back in the, 60s and 70s.
Hmm.
And he decided one day that he was going to prey on these people because they had money and influence. And so he started drugging. This is the Bikini Killer. He started drugging tourists and stealing their identities.
Oh, this sounds like the talented Mr. Ripley a little bit.
Yeah, but he would drug them and then eventually kill them. And so then
Right.
Thailand was like, "Oh, we're looking for this guy Charles Sobraj." They figured out who he was. They called him the Bikini Killer. He fled to India. They captured him in India, but because of extradition laws, he couldn't be deported for a certain number of years back to Thailand because he was wanted for crimes in India. He
Mhm.
would like go into hotels, he would look for rich people coming into the hotels, and then he would somehow break into or rent or the room above them, figure out where they would put their valuables in the room below, drill through the
Mhm.
floor, and go steal the valuables. And so he got busted for this, along with some other murders. And his girlfriend, this other French woman at the time, ended up bringing him on his birthday a cake in his jail cell in this security prison in central India
Mhm.
that was laced with who knows what, LSD, something. I have no idea. And he was like, "Oh, wow, I got this amazing gift. I would love to share it with you." And so he shared it with all the guards.
Of
And
course.
of course, right before he could be extradited back to Thailand, he escaped and he disappeared.
Imagine that.
And so he'd been traveling all over India, Nepal, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos throughout this whole time. Well, in 2003, I was in Nepal at the time this happened. He's hanging out at Annapurna Hotel at their casino. And the casinos in Nepal are interesting because if you have a plane ticket or you have the back page of an in-flight magazine, which you can find these all over Kathmandu because they, like any magazine, they put them in all their hotels to advertise their advertisement in the in-flight
Yeah.
magazine. So you can
Right.
go in and steal a handful of these, and the
Yeah.
back page gives you 500 Indian currency in the casino, which
Right.
at that point was like $20, $10, something like this. So he was just, going in every day with the back page of the in-flight magazine, and somebody ended up recognizing him and saying, "God, this guy's been hanging out here a lot." And so they called the authorities, and they came in and they're like, "You're Charles Sobraj." And he's like, "Of course I am. It's right here in my passport." And they're like, "Well, you're wanted for murder of these two European tourist women on the
Yeah.
Annapurna Circuit Trail, and we're taking you to jail." And it was the same guy that was trying to bust him in the 70s, and he didn't have there was some the guy is slippery. He slipped through it. And now he's probably making a fortune. We'll get into this in a second.
Speaking of another movie, it sounds like Tom Hanks' character Hanratty and Catch Me If You Can, chasing him for a long time and finally
I
getting
have a story about that, and I'll tell you that in a minute.
him.
That movie's I have two stories around that. Anyway, so Charles Sobraj is caught in 2023. He's released, I think, right before COVID or in the middle of COVID, and there's this great picture of him on Royal Nepal going back toward India or somewhere, going back to France. And the two women sitting next to him are just, they're like doing this because they totally know who he is, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, you're this famous murderer. Oh, great. Well, apparently he got offered a Netflix deal. And so there's a TV series on Netflix called In Search of the Serpent or something like this.
Yes,
It's about his story. And so it's interesting, we glorify this in the West. We love
sure.
these stories, and now we're paying this guy for his story. It's just like, oh
Yeah, the criminal is
my God.
benefiting financially from their crime, and only in the West, right? Only in America.
So catch me if you can. I won't release his name, but I know somebody here who owns the original script of that because he was one of the people trying to get investment money to help produce it before um was it Spielberg? I don't
Yeah,
Yeah,
Spielberg, I think
okay,
made
before
that.
Spielberg bought the rights to it.
Yeah.
So they were shopping this around for a while before that.
Oh wow.
Now,
Okay.
what's interesting is the character in it, Abagnale, right?
Abagnale, yeah, Frank
Okay.
Abagnale. True story, of course.
Oh yeah. So he went into the FBI as the counterfeit and forgery master. Okay. So me growing up in Vienna, Virginia, Dunloring, right? All my neighbors are at some level on the take, which I've always found fascinating. My best friend's father was Abagnale's first or second replacement at the FBI. He was the
Really?
counterfeit and forgery guy at the FBI.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so he gave us a tour of the FBI. And when you walk into that building,
Yes.
they have the guy in the mask from the Munich Olympics
Yep.
as a a mannequin standing there, this is so and so, we never knew who he was. And it's just like, oh, that's really messed up. But that's what you see when you walk into the FBI building. At least that's what you did when I was there, 1987 to 1889.
You know what's funny about that is when you work um, for the FBI and you work in the capacity I did, where I was in counterintelligence the whole time. I only went to headquarters one time that I could remember for one day. And I only
Come
worked.
for a brunch.
Yeah, I only worked in a main field office twice, briefly, very briefly, because the rest of my career I was in what's called off-site locations, undercover locations.
Sure, yeah.
And
you, you do a random check-in, right?
Yeah,
Call a number
told,
and you give a code.
Yeah, you're told stay away from the main office, don't show up at headquarters. And
well, you'd imagine it's all being watched, so it's like,
yeah,
oh, they know who all the analysts are, but they don't know who the field.
So yeah, it's non-employees and tourists who see more of headquarters than I ever did.
That's funny. Yeah, when I saw that movie, it blew me away because I was like, "Oh my god, that's what my friend's father did." Literally, that's what his job was.
So, do you think that
forgery,
the Thuggees were completely eradicated and squashed?
Well, that's why I brought up Charles Sobraj, because it's like here he's kind of mimicking that pattern.
Yeah,
and it's interesting that we're talking about Kali and Kali, cultism in a sense. There's nothing wrong with Kali. I mean, Kali's an amazing deity of sorts. But you've got to think from around 2012 forward, this end of the world Mayan change of the world prediction, you started to see this prevalence of, recognition of Kali, in the woo-woo crowds and the meditational crowds and the hippie crowds. They did a huge display in Times Square on all the billboards. Madonna did her devotion to Kali, Katy Perry. I mean, they've all kind of done it symbolically in music as well. And so it's interesting that we have this revitalization of, recognition of Kali. So the question, as you're asking, have they truly gone away? Well, I don't know, right? Because if we have this rise in this, ancient belief system, well, some of these offshoots are the Thuggee cults. So,
the topic of I told you about the Dan Simmons novel, his first novel of note from 1985, Song of Kali, is about a modern Thuggee cult. A guy, the main character, who's a literary analyst expert. He goes to Calcutta with his wife, who's born in India, and their little daughter, and he's supposed to have a meeting with an author, an Indian author who may or may not be dead, and he gets mixed up with this Kali cult, and there's some really creepy supernatural possibly things that go on. And the premise of the novel is, of course, there's no way they wiped these guys out. They got so many of them, I think in 1857, I think it was, but of course they're not going to wipe them all out.
Well, this beggars the question. I mean, not to draw weird ties to like Project Paperclip, but could the British have enlisted these people as Thuggee assassins and killers for the regime?
Yeah.
Like, hey, we'll give you a stipend. You're now a British officer, but we need you to perform these tasks because you're damn good at it. Anyway.
And meanwhile, teach our guys how to do what you do.
Sure. There is always that benefit as well for those who make profit, right? Yeah. Those that benefit from the situation. That's interesting. I mean, I even look at the Gurkhas. Nothing against the Gurkhas, but these are, villagers that have a very different concept of death. And so the Gurkha soldiers were some of the most, prolific fighters during World War II, especially because they didn't value life and death like, the Abrahamic religions do.
Right.
They're doing yearly or quarterly sacrifices, they're feeding their village and surviving, and it's like it's survival of the fittest in some of these villages, the Gorkha and Gurkha district villages in Nepal. A lot of the Gurkha soldiers now come out of India, but the majority of them back then came out of Nepal, and they would go into places like Burma or Brunei during World War II, and they would slaughter the Japanese because they had no remorse. We were talking about the man who would be king last time we talked.
Oh yeah, and Billy Fish. Remember when he's
I'll go to
surrounded?
Kali! And he runs down into battle with his kukri, and
Hey,
that's
I thought it was interesting that
because he doesn't have.
Saeed Jaffrey, who played Billy Fish, was in the Deceivers.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
he is. Oh my God.
he's great. So yeah, but go ahead with your thought about the what you were just saying.
Well, I mean, I was bringing up movies and we were comparing that, but the Gurkhas just they were relentless, and so I think this is why the British have kept them on as their elite commandos in a sense, because these are like the Green Berets, or even groups
Right?
that we don't hear about. I mean, they're sent into the thick of it, and they adapt. Like a lot of people don't adapt. They adapt because that's their lifestyle. And I've always, my dad did his doctoral dissertation in a Gurkha village, and so it's like a lot of the headmasters of the villages in that area were all retired World War II, Gurkha soldiers. And
Yeah. I thought it was cool when I was in Iraq. We were walking out of the Baghdad airport, which, the coalition forces, mostly us, had come in.
mostly us.
Yeah. And we come walking out of the terminal building, and there's a patrol of Gurkhas there. And it was the first time I'd seen them, in the field of, and there's the blade. And my buddy Eric, who thank God he's the guy I went to Iraq with, he pointed him out. He goes, hey Walter, there's Gurkhas. It's like, oh, images of, there we go, images of the man who would be king and all those there we go, look at that. Oh, there it is, beautiful.
Yeah, this one's super nice. I've a lot of them rust out real quick.
What is that forged of?
So they make these out of the leaf springs of Tata trucks nowadays.
Okay.
Because it's all like solid iron, and so
Sure, yeah, right.
they'll forge it down and polish it out. I love how the back is made. It goes, everything is amazing, and then you have your
Yeah.
sharpening stones, you have your cut knife and your sharpener. I can get the sharpener out. There we go.
There it is. Yeah.
And then it conveniently fits on your belt, and they'd always wear them behind their back so that they can easily
Sure.
pull them.
Yeah.
But every single Gurkha soldier in Kathmandu and all around Nepal, they all have their kukris.
Right.
This one's a little bit bigger. A lot of them are a little bit smaller. I have several of these. I've got one that's super huge for buffalo slaughters, and
it was so frustrating because when I went to Afghanistan the first time, the U.S. had just put, a week before I arrived, they just put the order out, no more bringing, what they considered trophies are actually the old Martini Henry rifles from the Victorian era. They'll sell them to you. It's not like a battlefield trophy. They got stacks and stacks and stacks of them in the carpet shops and stuff. My buddy Eric, he's got two that he's got hanging on his wall at home, because he went there before me when, you could buy those things. And I wasn't able to get my Martini Henry for my collection.
I could even show that. That's a funny thing. Speaking of,
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you guys who are adventure nerds and firearms historians, you know what I'm talking about. If you watch The Man Who Would Be King, the rifles that they're carrying, Sean Connery and Michael Caine, that's the Martini Henrys.
I don't collect guns, unfortunately. I mean, I wish I did, but
I don't really collect them. But
speaking of kukris, so this is the famous Coronation Kukri rum.
Okay.
I've had this since 1995. I've never
wow. Okay.
It. Kukri rum has won some of the best rums in the world, but buying a Kukri Coronation Too
There
funny.
we go. There we go.
So, wow. Do you think there are Thuggy cults?
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
How
it,
would we know? What would we know to look for, the telltale signs?
um,
That's my curiosity.
mm, you probably know more about the Kali worship, the details of it, and the thugs than the cults than I do. But as an investigator, I would dig into that knowledge, and from that, I would, obviously extrapolate what you would look for. You could look for it in the forensics of the victims.
Well,
You,
strangulation is a key.
mhm,
So this wow, going to quote our good friend Joseph Farrell, to go way out on the limb of speculation where the
yeah,
branch no longer supports the weight of the speculation. Um, Powerful interests taking out a money man through strangulation in a jail cell. Should
yes,
I go
interesting,
further than that?
interesting.
And
Yeah.
so, well, what are prisoners? A lot of them in the past were thuggies, right? Or
Mhm.
living this thug life of sorts. And so this really it does beg the question. It's like, okay, maybe I've always wanted to get into forensics. I've been fascinated with details, and so to
Mhm.
me that's what I do all day long. I create graphics and I create detail. And so it's like, why not look the other direction? And so, these puzzles pop up all the time. Can you find five things different? I'm like, boom, 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 boom.
If
Because I
if
see it. But so that's
yeah,
the forensics interest. But
right.
it would be interesting to start looking into thuggy beliefs and practices that are showing up in modern day crime.
If Dan Simmons, and I believe he did his research well, in the novel Song of Kali, one of the things that the new inductees are required to do is retrieve a corpse and bring that corpse to their place of their ritual recruitment induction,
Skull and bones much?
and uh, bring that corpse to the feet of the Kali statue, the
Sure.
given Kali statue. So as an investigator who doesn't know as much about this stuff as I should, in discussing it, I would say, well, have any bodies turned up missing from morgues? Because in the novel, they go get the body, they pay a guy to get the body from a morgue. Cemeteries, obviously. It's pretty gruesome stuff too. Um, so that would be one clue. The of course the strangled victims, as far as that part goes. But I would say look for the Kali cult if you're looking for Thuggees. That would be
No,
one
well,
avenue.
kind of one avenue, right? But there's also the sense of masking yourself, and so these people were, the original masters of deception in a
Oh
sense,
yes, yeah, absolutely.
which is interesting because we see this a lot, in gangs. We see this a lot in mafiosa families. There is this masking of identity or this shift. It's a little harder to hide these days with as much technology as we have.
Sure, but we still have all these missing persons cases too.
Right. No, exactly. And that's kind of where I was going with that because
And what about the body parts that have turned up in places? Torsos without hands and feet. To get prints from, no heads. Um, that kind of thing.
no dental. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, no way to identify the victim, so therefore, it makes it more difficult
It's
to.
it's kind of like during thuggy times of strangulation. If you don't have a blood murder, then
Mhm.
it kind of gets dismissed because
And then there's always the the fusion of ideas. For instance, people talk about these weird vampire cults.
Mhm.
Well, how many of them might actually have been inspired by a veneration, um, through their filter, their perspective, of Kali, particularly in a more ignorant Western perspective. Ooh, they see Kali with the teeth and the head, the severed head in the hand, and that appeals to their dark, more horrific,
I just I had an interesting
without
connection.
understanding what that means.
Right. I just had an interesting connection. Kali and culling,
Well,
right?
and then there's California.
Oh, well, that's City of Lost Angels. Yeah. No, I just it's interesting because in a sense, they believe that they're culling, a specific
Sure.
group of people. And so I think that's culling, Kali, there's a connection there maybe, if distant, but
It makes you wonder if you started looking at missing person cases or unsolved murders and such, if you applied the Thuggee Kali
layer to it.
filter,
Filter, yeah.
would that clarify, you know what I'm saying? Might that answer some questions that haven't even been thought of to be asked in
Interesting.
particular crimes?
Oh wow.
And that, see, this is, I'm a spy hunter. Okay. When you are a spy hunter, you think outside of the box, you
that's
throw
a
the spaghetti
really
on the wall.
like I have all
Because
these strings, some of them attached, some of them don't, but if I put
yeah,
this over top of them, oh my goodness.
yeah,
There's other strings that show up that I would never have considered.
yeah. So
And so that's interesting. We go back to Pat Pattinson. That's what he was doing to kind of solve all these areas of mystery. Hmm.
so it's strange. It's strange. Well, you know what? We have,
Reach the magic.
yes, we've done it. We've
This has
reached
been
our time.
fascinating. I
We just got started. We need to do a second part of continuing this. I like this because we just kind of go with, you know,
it's
let
it's
the
always
conversation
interesting.
flow.
I love the open flow format, but I keep stumbling upon new research, and our discussion last week kind of triggered that as well. And I'm like, God, I really want to dive into this topic and know more about it. And
Sure.
so, to kind of summarize, I started thinking about Charles Sobraj, and I'm like, what were his methods? Because he would be a modern day Thuggee. Who were the Thuggees? We got them in Indiana Jones from my childhood and the Temple of Doom, to the movie that I presented to you, The Deceivers, which came out about the same time. Gunga Din. It's mentioned in two Tintin novels, Cigars of the Pharaohs and Tintin in Tibet. And so you start realizing that this story of these highwaymen goes back and back and back and back and back.
Yes, indeed.
And it's everywhere. And so, it would be interesting to follow some of those patterns. I mean,
Pull those threads,
yeah.
pull those threads. And we will definitely have you back to pull more of those threads
Appreciate it.
on another episode. So let's, I want to throw out there, um, Hans Dietrich, our good friend, is going to be one of the speakers
Oh,
and
yes.
folks at the Lost Horizons Symposium, and he's helping make it happen. He's very much involved. So we're really looking forward to this event, all of us. And you can go learn about that at walterbosley.com/shop. But Hans, tell them where they can find you.
So I'll be speaking in Sedona, the 27th through the 30th. So I actually speak on the 29th on Sunday from 1 to 1:45. I'm going to be talking about the magic of symbols. I've kind of had to condense my lecture into a 45-minute lecture, but I'm adding new materials from my other two lectures. So ancient Cometian symbology and Buddhist symbology, as well
Okay.
as my thesis on what the magical symbols are and why they represent humanity.
Okay. Great.
I'm also speaking in Las Vegas in September. I think it's the 14th to the 17th. Um, I think I'm speaking on a similar topic. I'm trying to change it up. I've been talking about the Dropa and Kemet for a bit, so it's like
Mhm.
You and I have talked a lot about, Shambhala and some of these ancient land of Chem,
Yeah.
and these concepts. And so I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate some of this into more of my lectures. But everybody, you can find me at megalithic.mysteries.com or megamyst.com for short. I own both of them. They go to the same site. This tells, some of my story. It follows me through some of my adventures in Peru and Egypt, the twice that I've been there. I'm slowly updating it, but I work a lot, so it's hard to get to it. But I'm trying to get some of my Nepal and Bhutan adventures in there as well. You
Excellent.
can also find my 3 books. I wish I had grabbed them, but it's Dropa Legends and Lore. That's the first one I wrote. The Magic of Symbols is the second one I wrote, and the third book that I wrote or have written, I guess is a better way of saying, is Kemet, or the mysteries of Kemet. Um, Basically, the land before the Greeks, which talks about Egypt before the Greek influence. And so all those are available at lulu.com. If you just look up Dropa, you'll find that, Magic of Symbols or Mysteries of Kemet. They all show up. Or you can basically find the links on my website, Megalith.
And we will add the links in the description when this is
Excellent.
posted. So,
But otherwise, that's what I'm up to. And then in November, I'm speaking at Lost
speaking and hanging
Horizons,
out,
and it's
and
going to be amazing. I
it's going to be
haven't.
cool. We're going to be visiting, doing a tour of a Buddhist temple there in Big Bear, and it's going to be great. We're going to be enjoying, Indian and Nepalese cuisine,
Yes, I'm so
and
excited.
Thai food, and just doing also the cool harmonica stuff. It's just going to be great. It's going to be we're all going to be geeking out on the theme. So, folks, check that out. You're gonna want to be there with
And many more things coming forward. So yeah.
And I want to say that we're going to be announcing that we're offering the ticket price. When you look at the ticket price, that's going to be there's going to be a special that's going to be for couples for 2.
Oh wow.
So by all means, folks, check it out. It's a little
Bring a
4-day
friend, a
escape.
colleague, a loved one. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to share lodging, you got to share your room, but
That's
yeah,
that's the great thing about these conventions is everybody getting comfortable with each other and
exactly, and getting to know each other and stuff. So we're looking
correct.
forward to that. But thank you again, Hans Dietrich, and
Appreciate it, Walter.
we're
Always
gonna do
always
this
enjoy
again.
these. Always enjoy these.
All righty, me too, me too. Look forward to the next one. So
Excellent.
good night, everybody. We'll
Have a
see
great
you
night,
on the
everybody. Thank you
next
so much.
episode. And